Hello and welcome to another live. Thank you for joining me today. Always good to be here with you to talk about our favorite topic of languages and language learning. And at the moment, I've been very, very busy actually getting ready for the Polyglot Conference, which starts on Friday and will be going on for 10 days. So if you haven't got a ticket yet, please do sign up. Very, very welcome. We have it's a donation-based ticket, voluntary donation, so anyone and everyone's welcome. And we will have lots and lots of language activities going on. So it fits in with this topic today because we're talking about why people sometimes feel that they never will learn a language and why it probably won't ever happen for a number of people. And I want to explore things that you know about this topic in the mix of what I'm going to do. You're very welcome to join the language learning events like the Polyglot Conference or any language event that you see. I know that I wouldn't be speaking out of turn to say that for other events as well, like the Polyglot Gathering and like Langfest and like Polyglotar, which are the big sort of international events that really invite anyone and everyone to come and talk and to speak at the events and to have everyone's welcome, basically. Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what group within society you feel you fit into, you're always welcome. And you're welcome, even though it's called Polyglot Conference, it doesn't actually mean that everybody has to say that feel that they're a polyglot. It's called Polyglot Conference because that's just the community it was born out of, and also it's the idea of polyglot also means multiple languages. So it could be multilingual. Okay, polyglot is just the Greek version of multilingual, and so you have to be a polyglot. It just means that there are lots of languages available to learn. All welcome to join. As I say, it's a voluntary donation. You can get the ticket for free and join us as well. You'll be very, very welcome. All you need to do is register on the website, and that's basically it, polyglotconference.com. So if you do that, you'll be ready. You can join in from now. There are things going on already this week and have been going on for the last week and even the whole year, in fact, on our site and on the live environment that we have. So you'll be very, very welcome to practice your languages. Now, okay. I want to talk though about in this, and a number of you, or they even don't want to, right? Why they never do it. Now, within the language learning community, we talk about language learning. This could be a number of skills as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily languages. It could be to a number of topics. Clearly, we're going to take as read that people want to learn a language. I know a few people said, well, maybe they just don't want to learn it. Well, okay, if they don't want to learn a language, then they're not going to learn a language, clearly. I mean, it's I can't really take that as one reason. I think that there are definitely things we can explore. So there can be reasons why people don't learn generally after they leave school, or even when they, because of cultural norms. For example, there are certain cultures I've lived in where they see me learning languages now at this age. I'm very young, obviously, but people see me learning languages now and they think it's quite strange that I would do something like that, because they say, well, surely you finished school, surely you've done university, it's work, right? And I think that's the first thing when it comes to learning, is if it seems like it's work and it feels stressful and it feels like a chore and something you have to do and you don't really want to do it, that's the first thing I think that stops you from learning. Most of the time, whenever I meet people who learn languages but they don't really get deep into it in terms of, they maybe start it and do a little bit, but then they don't get to a point where they can actually use it freely and converse. Because once you can do that, once you can converse freely in a language, I think then at that point, which is around about an A2, B1 level, where you can actually start really talking to people and using the language as a vehicle for communication, at that point, it's quite solid in that you can keep it out or potentially move it further forward. But until you get to that stage, it's very easy to just drop it. And one of the issues, and this was also pointed out to me as well in the comments, which I think is completely true, is that people often go to a class, or they will maybe go to have a teacher that they meet up with once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week maybe, but they don't do anything in between. The biggest danger is when you do something just once a week, because if you do something once a week for just an hour or even 2 hours, just one time a week, you will often not do enough repetition to be able to internalize the language or whatever the subject is that you want to learn. You just don't have enough contact with the material to be able to internalize it and to make it really part of you, and also then in turn to make it automatic and to be able to use it and manipulate it. And it's really the key to language learning, is doing something regularly on a daily basis and getting it to a point where it's just automatic. You come out with these things very simply, very easily, and you're used to playing with them and using them, right? Languages you have to be an active agent in the whole language learning experience. So that means you need to do something, even if it's just a little bit every single day, or at least as close to every single day as possible, so that it keeps renewing the knowledge in your head. And this is what people often don't do. They will just not do it. Some of the reasons that I saw come through where people don't potentially need the language. Of course, if you don't need the language, it's clear that the motivation might not be there as easily, to learn language. If you're feeling that you're not going to use it, or it's not going to get you anywhere, or you're not going to be able to have any real application for the language. Of course, in those circumstances too, it can be difficult to motivate yourself when the motivation is lacking. Now, that can happen in waves. So sometimes we just don't feel motivated for many, many reasons, not just that we don't use it in our daily lives, but also because there's kind of waves of, you feel happy one day, another day depressed, you have problems that come up in other areas of your life, and many, many things can affect the way you feel about learning. And so sometimes things like that can happen. And then one of the things that you can let go very easily is language learning, or another type of activity that's not vital to your day-to-day existence. It could be something, if you already speak the languages you need, and you're learning this as a bit of fun, and then a lot of things happen that mean that it's very difficult for you to do that and the stuff you need to just survive. Of course, you're going to prioritize the things you need to survive. Psychologically, though, that can have an impact, because when you let things go, if you don't agree with yourself in a very conscious way, first of all, that, okay, things aren't going very well at the moment, I need to take a break, I need to just stop. Psychologically, you can have that feeling of failure, which is never good. And certainly taking a break from language learning, or even saying you're going to take a break for an unspecified number of months or even years, it's not the end of the world, and it's definitely not a failure. It's a restructuring and a reorganizing of things that are important to you, your priorities in life, and that's completely valid to do. The important thing is for your own mental health. I believe that it's very important to make those decisions in a very conscious way. So if you know you're not going to be able to do something for a certain reason, it's best to admit it to yourself, accept it, internalize it as, this is a decision I'm making, and you're being an active agent. So these are the kinds of things that I think do impact on people's ability to succeed in language learning. When that doesn't happen, the break's fine, but be honest with yourself and make the decision in an active way, so that you have the least impact on your mental health and your outlook towards the language later on. The The other thing that I saw come up, which I thought was really intriguing, was someone just wrote privilege. So learning languages was seen as a privilege. I mean, I've traveled around quite a lot of the world, and I've met people who enjoy learning languages from all walks of life and very much different lifestyles. So I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that we can sometimes get stuck in our own world and make judgments based on one context. Say, I don't know, in particularly, I think in the West, sometimes people are quite guilty of that. That what happens in a Western country that are most vocal online, they're the ones that have potentially a lot of time and disposable income to be able to be putting themselves out there. But I think a mistake that a number of people in the West make is that they make judgments based on their own societal values, norms, and I wouldn't agree that that's a fair representation of everyone in the world. So, I mean, I've met people who have had quite difficult situations, people in the West, but also people in parts of Africa and parts of Asia, and other where I've been to in the world, and they will learn languages too, and they do it for many reasons as well. It's not just one reason, and people have typically done this throughout history. So people would learn languages they didn't necessarily need to learn for their local communities. They would learn languages in even, way back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, they would learn languages, and not necessarily for a specific need, but they would learn it. They might be interest, or it might be, it's not necessarily linked completely to a situation. It can just be that if you're motivated to learn, you will learn. So I don't know if privilege is fair to put on as a label for why people wouldn't learn a language. I think that this happens very often anyway. It might not happen in the way that we always perceive language learning with a teacher, paying a tutor, going to school, whatever. It might happen that people learn languages in very different ways. So it could be from TV, that happens quite a lot. It could be from another linguistic community nearby. It could be through literature. It could be through just listening to songs or the radio, or getting into manga, or it could be anything. And people do this around the world, and they're not all privileged people. Language learning is really something that, if people are interested in it, then they can, to a degree, do. And we have a lot of people all over the world online as well now. I mean, even the internet is okay. There are some limits, of course, but you get people from all walks of life and all different situations online. It could be that people, have other limitations, and it might not be money. Potentially, it could be other things that are that limit them to find ways to do it if they want to do it. And this is just the way I've seen things happen around the world, and I do think that people, does it sound not very good? Oh dear, I just saw some comments on this. I hope you can all hear me okay. Please do let me know. Just stop for a second talking and see if you can hear me okay. We had some problems with the internet today, so I'm just going to check to make sure. Do you have any idea I can make it okay? So you're nice to see you. I spend time watching and learning instead of learning because previous experience. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so Instagram keeps breaking up. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that unfortunately the sound on some of it does seem to be problematic. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on today with the internet, but unfortunately it's not perfect. But I will do my best, and I'll keep moving forward So hopefully it will improve or at least stay stable. So yeah, I think that when it comes to learning and why some people don't learn is that they fall into a few traps. The first one is they don't really know why they're doing it. So if it's a school system, for example, it can sometimes be the school's problem, the teacher's problem. If the child doesn't understand, when we're younger, the child doesn't understand the relevance of why they're learning what they're learning. I mean, if you go to school, particularly for English-speaking children, let me give you an example. Like, say, so an English-speaking family from the UK or the US, wherever they're from, you get a French-speaking family, you get a German-speaking families all go on holiday, and they all go to the same place. They go to, let's pick a country, Thailand. Okay, now those 5 families all have something in common, and one has something that's absolutely different to the rest of them. Okay, they all learn, the things that they have in common are all of them learn a language at school. These 4, the German, French, Spanish, and Italian children, go to school and they typically learn English. Okay, they learn English. The English-speaking family goes to school and learns usually French, Spanish, or German, possibly Mandarin, could be anything else, but they learn another language, right? They may learn the others as well. They may learn Italian too, who knows? But they learn one of those languages. When they go to Thailand as a family, the lingua franca for all of them is English. Now, the impact on children from the 4 families within Europe who speak, learn English at school, is that they see a use for their English lessons when they go on holiday with their family, even if they don't listen to any music or television when they're at home, because all 4 of those countries, the TV is dubbed, they don't really listen to much English. They're quite, they're countries typically where their languages are very dominant. So where they've got dominant languages, they still go to another country and they use English. So that's the first thing. What the message is for the English-speaking child is, I've been learning these languages this whole time, and now I've landed here on holiday, and every time I go on holiday, the typical language that everyone wants to speak is English, which is my language anyway, so why am I bothering learning these other languages? So we need to find new reasons why children learn languages. For children learning English, it's obviously very clear. They get validation for their learning every time they go abroad, whether it's an English-speaking country or not, because their lingua franca is very often English. There are some exceptions. So some German speakers could go to a part of Turkey where many of the locals speak German well, so they don't have to speak English. But if they go outside of that area, very typically, even then, there will be a time where they need to use English as the common language if they don't speak Turkish. So that's one huge thing, is the understanding of the why. That, I think, is something that we need to have a very honest and open conversation with people about, the reasons to learn a language, why bother. We've got Google Translate, you've got all these things that you can use if you get stuck and you need to express something or find something. You've got the internet. And then there's the health benefits to it. There's clearly there are other benefits, for your mental dexterity, for you to be able to neurologically. There are benefits to learning another language. For neuroplasticity, there are benefits. And listen to somebody like Thomas Bach, and they will be able to talk about the subject in much greater depth and with much more authority than I can. But if you sort of find that there are neurological benefits to learning a second language. They can understand health. They're taught about health in nutrition and all that kind of stuff, and this can make part of that. There are other benefits that they can understand too, particularly if you're learning languages that are related to the language you already speak. So, for example, with English, if you speak French and German, you really do get a better grasp of the English language as well. You get a sense of our vocabulary is from French. So that helps. The German helps you to understand the roots of the grammar of English. So why, for example, when you say to somebody, if you have a problem, please send an email to, and then the monolingual English speaker will often wonder whether it's to Sandra and I or Sandra and me. And of course, if you speak German, you understand that it can only be to Sandra and me, because it's an accusative. It's you're the object, right? You're the, well, in that case, the indirect object. Email to I in its own, right? You'd say to me. But when we put another name there, people get very confused. And understanding the grammatical reasons behind that by learning a language like German helps to really cement that knowledge. And that's just one example of many. Understanding, about the English language and the grammar and why it's a Germanic language. If you study another Germanic language, you really understand, okay, what a strong verb is about, why certain languages have strong verbs, and how much we have in common when we use the language in when we're talking. Also, you get to understand the history of the language, where things have come from, why we have certain turns of phrase, why we say certain things in a certain way, why things have different connotations depending on where we are and what we're using. So there are some really, really cool reasons to learn languages, and I think we do miss a trick often that people, or teachers particularly, don't often explain this in a very... Oh, it needs to be reiterated as well. Sometimes they may explain it, but it needs to be reiterated, because children need repetition, just like adults need repetition to learn things and to internalize things and to make things click. They need to be said in one way, and then another way, and then another way, and then another way, and then another way, to hit everybody who's different. We're all different. We talk about neurodiversity. In fact, everybody on the planet has a different way of thinking to a degree. It's not that that just one group of people thinks in a different way. Each individual will have a slightly different take on things. Certain things will ring true for one person, and other things might not ring true. Things will make more sense couched in a certain way. So things do need to be explained in many different ways until it really makes sense to the individual listening. And it's amazing. I've had experiences like this where I've had conversations with people, and we've had repeated conversations, and then someone said to me, "Do you know what? It's because you said that word or that thing, or you explained it in that particular way. That's when I really got it. I know that we talked about this before, but that's why I got it, because that meant something to me." And as a teacher or somebody talking to a group of people, it's very difficult in one. Our goal is always to reach out to as many people as possible, right? I mean, we want to be able to appeal to all of the diversity in front of us as a speaker, and we want to be able to reach out to every individual as well. But in order to do that, we've got to sometimes say things in many different ways over a period of time. And I think that's something that as teachers is important to do, and for us as individuals to understand that sometimes we may need to make this into a conversation that goes on, and a way of perceiving, understanding, and internalizing information. And sometimes that can be challenging because of many, many other things, but it's a kind of a conscious thing that can help with overcoming these kinds of difficulties in learning a language or learning many different things. So yes, I actually firmly believe that anyone can learn a language. It's just whether or not we know how to reach out to that person and explain things to the individual. I think that is the important thing. I mean, if somebody can sometimes be in love with the idea of saying they can speak a language or learning a language because it's just kind of on their bucket list, like buying a ticket to Mongolia. If Mongolia is on your booking list, You go online, you save up for a while, you buy a ticket to Ulaanbaatar, and you fly off to Ulaanbaatar, and you spend 3 weeks in Mongolia, and you have a great time, okay? You come back, you may go trekking in Nepal, you make whatever you want to do. But those activities are great, they're great goals. Learning a language isn't quite the same as one of those bucket lists that you save money and you buy a ticket and you just go there. And it's the journey, it would be more like, let's say you live in, I don't know, in Austin, Texas, and you want to go to Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. It's miles away. Okay, having Mongolia on your bucket list and speaking Mongolia and just flying there and doing the physical thing, or going by land all the way around to Mongolia, and taking months and months to get there. Okay, walking there. This is kind of the equivalent of doing that with a language. And I think sometimes the idea, let's learn a language, you start walking, you get to a certain point and you get very tired very quickly. It's exciting maybe for the first few miles, and all of a sudden, nightmare. And that's kind of where I think people fall down, is that they misjudge what's involved, how much time they have. Do they have to go back to work? Do they have to go back to their family life? Do they have to do something else? Have they got another thing that they're doing, or other things that they're working on? What's realistic for them to do? How much time can they really dedicate to learning that new language? And I think a lot of the time it's that kind of honest discussion, honest conversation, and honest agreement with yourself that I think is the biggest downfall for language learning. Other things that I think do realistically affect people are materials. So finding the right materials, German, Spanish, Italian, Chinese even. There are many, 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 many courses that you can try and use, right? A number of these things to see which ones appeal to you. What would you actually want to pick up and study? Are the ones that just visually appeal more to you? Are the ones that were the explanations? So I think it's always good to sort of get in that stage of language learning, is say I got bored of the book, don't like the book anymore, and starts with something else and finishes somewhere else. And so it feels a bit messy with it, and then slowly but surely the sort of the motivation dwindles and goes away, and then you're kind of left with, oh, I'm not really studying it anymore. And that happens quite a lot too. So I meet people who do that kind of thing. I meet people who think that also they can just rush ahead. So, well, I'm doing a chapter a week and that's it. Okay, so what happens when you get to chapter 5 and you realize you've forgotten most of chapters 1 to 4? Is it a problem that maybe sometimes I think it's a problem with, I don't feel like I should go back because that feels like I've failed. I don't know, I want to keep going forward because I've started this tempo and I'm bored now of the other things. So there can be a number of things that can really impact how you feel about the sort of the learning process. And it's easy to underestimate what kind of an impact that can have. And I think it's really important to say to yourself, look, okay, I'm a human being, there's so much I can learn. And also fixing yourself a goal that you sort of make immovable, it doesn't help. You need to have some flexibility. Sometimes you need to go back to the start and just revise and take a few weeks to revise. Lots and lots of vocabulary. The teacher, they may give you a list of vocabulary that's just absolutely bad. And he was going to a Greek class, and they had given him 132 country names with the names of what the people are called from those countries and nationalities, and also the language names. And I was just like, well, there's no point in you learning all of this if you can't introduce yourself properly and talk about your family. Why do you need to know 135 different words for countries, nationalities, and then also the language, which was probably, you're talking a list of almost 400 in any language. And I think you need to be able to also know what's relevant to you. And that also sometimes is one of the other issues that I see, that people will get so lost and stuck and demotivated on these huge lists of vocabulary that they don't actually need. And it can be really problematic. It's the key thing is to start learning things that are really relevant to you and things that you can say and use already. There's no use unless you want to be a polymath, which is somebody who reads in language only and you don't really necessarily speak. If you just want to read, then maybe reading literature and maybe reading you along the way with your reading. But if you actually want to speak the language, reading poetry very early on, for example, can be interesting, but not necessarily conducive to being able to speak the language. And it can feel a bit off-putting even. I speak from experience. I've been a lot of poetry and I found it very, very interesting and I enjoyed it for what it was. On the flip side, at the moment, after 1 year of Gaelic, I can barely introduce myself in Gaelic. And that's kind of not being able to introduce myself is a bit weird. But then I can sometimes wouldn't have imagined I could even look at last year. But these kinds of things, it's about if you know what's happened and you know where you want to go, you can at least balance those kinds of things. If you're honest with yourself, you can balance where you are and where you're at, and you can sort of find a right way forward. So yeah, this is kind of where I sort of sit with all of this. I'm trying to see if there are any questions here because I can see some comments. To be honest, I think another reason might be that some people just don't enjoy the learning process itself, but they want to know the language. It's the same with many. Yeah, absolutely, Maurizio. I think you're right that some people, this is why I was saying it's kind of the difference between learning Mongolian and going to Mongolia by plane. If you have to walk there, which is what language learning would be like, it would be like walking to Mongolia from some state in the US and trying to make your way by foot. You need a lot longer to do it, and some days are hard because some days it'll be raining, some days it'll be snowing, some days it'll be very hot, some days one day you'll be as being sort of you forget words. But there are lots of things that can happen that are kind of equivalents to language learning, and this is the kind of the daily reality of learning anything, particularly languages, is that it's sometimes not fun. Sometimes it isn't. I'm not going to pretend to you that every single day of my life learning languages is always like a pleasure and fun. Sometimes it can be hard going and it can be boring. And unpopular opinion perhaps in a language learning community, but it's true. I mean, I don't know if somebody says that every single day of their language learning journey is absolutely awesome and amazing and wonderful, then I don't know. I can't relate to that myself. I can't relate to this. Every single day is amazing. Every single day is awesome. Every single day is just the best, because it's not true for me. If it's true for you, then I'm very, very happy for you. I know pretty much no one though that's true. Off days, they all have times and periods where, for many, many reasons, they get bored or they can't be bothered, or the text or what they need to learn is actually quite frustrating because you can make the same mistakes over and over again. And I go through the same kinds of feelings and emotions on my own journey, so I know this. Do I have a live every week? Yes, I do have a live every week. I do it every Sunday at 6 p.m. Central European time. So yeah, I've only had 1 week off, I think, in the last year. So I don't know, next weekend might be a bit more difficult because of the Polyglot Conference, but I think that it might be difficult to do it next weekend because I'll be at the Polyglot Conference. But if you want to join, come and join me at the Polyglot Conference. I could maybe do like a live thing there, where I do my live, but at the Polyglot Conference instead. And it won't be publicly available. It will just be for people at the conference. So yeah, maybe we'll do that instead. And we'll be able to talk to each other as well, because we'll be on Zoom. So yeah. Other things that you might want to learn, want the result, but doesn't enjoy the training itself. Absolutely, Maurizio, you're totally right. This is the thing, I mean, I think a lot of us see this, and it's not just language learning, it's many, many things. So, and I think this is why also we get targeted with people selling us products. So particularly I see a comparison between language learning, targeted by quick methods or ways, solutions to get what you want in with the least amount of effort possible in the shortest amount of time, and yeah, it's extremely desirable, and I get that it would be quite nice to be able to do that kind of thing, but the reality is, quite honestly, that the no pain, no gain expression is really quite true. I mean, it just takes time. It really does take time, and you can do amazing things in a matter of months. You can do amazing things in a matter of months with all three of those things. You can get some really good results, but it's work. It's very hard work. You speak a language completely fluently in a few months. Depends on the language, and also I would say, yeah, if you're expecting it to be perfect, then you're going to be disappointed. It takes a long time. There's a lot to a language. I mean, people often talk about just the grammar and the vocabulary, but there are expressions that you have to learn. There are proverbs. There are turns of phrase. There are different jokes. There are norms that you understand only through years of speaking a language within a community. There are different accents, there are different dialects, there are different slang. There's so much to learn when it comes to words and this amount of grammar, and you're done. It's just a little bit simplistic, and it just doesn't work that way. But there was a book that was written, Learn Greek in 25 Years. I mean, the title's not incorrect, but it doesn't sell in the same way as lose weight in 3 weeks, learn a language in 3 days, get fit in 3 hours. I don't know. All of these things sell, right? Because people want to buy the little pill that will get you what you want very, very quickly. And unfortunately, it's just not how it works. What you can be taught is, I think this is sort of where I think I would agree that you can have people who can help you find your method to learn a language, understand how it will work for you. That can be taught quite quickly. But again, that needs reinforced as well. You need to keep reinforcing it with yourself and potentially with somebody else in the beginning. So yeah, I think one must be aware of the difficulties we'll have and look for the most suitable method. Absolutely. Because if you try and do something just because it works for another person, it doesn't necessarily work for you. So Luca, for example, is somebody who's learned a number of languages very well, but some of his languages very well, but some of his methods don't work for me. They don't gel with me. Professor Alexander Arguelles as well does things with languages that just do not interest me, and he's an excellent language learner. And some of the things that he does may work for some of you, but they don't for me. And that doesn't mean that either he or Luca or I are particularly bad or good. It just is different. And this is why I say, when we talk about neurodivergency and different within the way we are as people, it's extremely important to be very conscious of that and to acknowledge that. Richard, I'd like to ask if you still study which one? I can't see what it is. What I'm supposed. Oh, Davis Emerel. Okay. Do I still North Sami? Do I still study North Sami? I don't. So North Sami for me was an opportunity to explore the language. So I'm going to make a slight difference here for you. So sometimes I study a language and sometimes I learn a language. I know it sounds like it's semantics, and it kind of is, but in my head, when I study a language, it's to get an overview of the language, it's to possibly say some things, possibly, but it's more to do with actually understanding how a language works and understanding a bit about the grammar and the vocabulary and getting an idea of just how the language generally works. If I learn a language, for me, that's more I want to speak it and use it. And so when everyone talks about languages of languages I've spoken, I always say that I've studied a certain number of languages. And that's because I haven't and definitely cannot speak 50 languages or something ridiculous. It's just crazy. I mean, I'm not an unrealistic person when it comes to these things, and I recognize that saying you speak 50 languages is just, for me, it's fairly absurd. I don't think I've actually ever met anybody who can do that. So I talk about studying, and that can mean sort of in a more, not strictly academic in terms of through a university, but in a more academic way. So understanding how the languages work and pulling them apart and understanding the similarities and differences to other languages within the same language family, and understanding about how the borrowings of words and things and the etymologies all fit together with other languages or neighboring languages and things like that. So that's the kind of thing that I typically do. And that was what I did with North Sami. I got the opportunity to do it in a group and I thought it was great, so I did it. But no, I have carried on with it. I have got all of my notes and materials. And maybe when I've got to a point with Estonian, where I have been learning Estonian to actually communicate, I would potentially go back to it and see if it's easier for me to use that knowledge to activate something of my North Sami. A similar thing as well with Finnish. I mean, Finnish I studied and learned, and then I learned it to a point where I could communicate basic ideas, but I didn't. I knew that it would be a limited thing because we don't get to speak Finnish in the Balkans. It's just not a language we get to use. So I always knew it would be one of those languages that I would have studied at some point. But hopefully, I mean, things change. Life changes. You never know where things take you. Let's see. Have you ever tried bilingual translation method that Luca uses? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Rasmus. I'm not a huge translation person. I think translation is a slightly separate skill. I mean, clearly I've studied translation because I studied languages at university, so I had to do translation and I had to do interpreting at university. So I had to do these to understand how they work and how to do them, and I had to learn about translation loss and translation gain, all that kind of stuff. I had to learn, about kind of the differences between, I mean, also with my work, translation, the difference between translation and localization, and then it gets a little bit more involved, but doing that as a learning style hasn't necessarily been the thing that I've used. Sometimes I'll use it in kind of an oral way. How do I say this or that or the other? And I will do it, but not in the way Luca does it. It's not really for me. But I think it works extremely well. I mean, clearly it works well because Luca's achieved some really amazing things. So just not something I normally do. How do you get through the words used nowadays? Let me give you an example. I had a tandem with a French guy and said, "C'est une expérience." I put the film, okay. And he responded, "Old friend." I think you get you get when you see words or hear words that maybe are not used today in a language, then it is good to get that feedback. I think it's from somebody. I have to say, sometimes in some languages, feedback from one speaker that absolutely goes against feedback from another speaker. So sometimes it can really depend on groups of people who speak a language. Sometimes it can just be that you are using a word that's not regularly used, and that's completely fine. You can just ask for alternatives and learn from it. It's completely fine. So yeah, I do come across that from time to time. I'm trying to read that word there because it's a bit small on my screen. Okay. Well, no, I mean, yeah, it could be, or it could be a more general thing. French is spoken in so many places as well, so it can be tricky. Did common languages become boring in terms of studying them to you throughout the years? It seems like you were focusing on less common languages nowadays. Would you still be interested in improving some of the more common languages you studied in the past? Absolutely. I mean, Maurizio, these things tend to go in waves. So, you know, a language like Italian, for example, I studied at university, and then I didn't use for a few years. And then when I went to work, one of my jobs, I had to use Italian, and for me, my Italian was extremely influenced by my Spanish at that point. My accent particularly was influenced by my Spanish, because my Spanish was definitely dominant. I'd been living and studying in Spain, Spaniard, and well, as a native Spanish speaker, I was studying that, and so when I went back to speaking Italian, it was kind of weird to do that. But what I found was speaking it for a while again got me back into it. And then also I had an Italian friend at the time, and we used Italian a lot. So that really helped to get me back. And he used to laugh at me for when I'd say things in Spanish, or when I'd have this weird pronunciation. And then throughout periods of time, I've come in contact with people. So there was a 4-year period in Skopje where I was friends with an Italian family, and we used Italian on a daily basis. So my Italian really did I went back to it for obvious reasons. I was speaking with them. So words that I'd forgotten, or words that I hadn't really used, like il giubbino, I didn't, words like that, I don't remember if I actually knew it, or, you know, it's a very simple word, but I never really spoke about coats and things, especially for kids. But because I was sort of dealing with it in, you know, it was quite an interesting thing, and they spoke a dialect as well. So it was yeah, that was quite interesting, because they would teach me some dialect words, which was quite cool. Yeah, but I mean, some of the dialect words have gone again, but some of them have stayed. Okay. Époustouflant. Which, but breathtaking, of course. Yeah, yeah. Extraordinary. Yeah, extraordinaire you can use as well in French for that. You could use other words too. From the idea of like, okay, souffler, for example, is to blow. Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely use other words. It's not a word that I would tend to use in French, I've got to be honest. So when I saw it, I had to take a double take. But yeah, it's an interesting word to use, and I'm a great believer in sometimes surprising people with a word that's maybe not so common. Sometimes it takes people a little bit aback, and it surprises them. Sometimes it's just not a common word, and people just don't use it. So they will say, actually, you know what, people won't commonly understand what you're talking about. I get that sometimes in languages where certain vocabulary is just not commonly understood. And if I were to use the word assertive here in the Balkans, it's not a common concept. So the word exists, and I could use it, of course, but people wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. And more often than not, they would actually think that I'd made it up, or more often than not, they would actually think that I'd made it up, or I didn't, I'd made a mistake, or they'd probably hear something else and they'd correct it, they'd auto-correct it in their brains. But yeah, there are concepts and words sometimes people don't use as well. I've spoken a few times as well about certain birds and flowers and things that if I use the Balkan names for some of the languages, they're not commonly understood, and it leads to confusion. So sometimes it can be good to take speakers' warnings on these things and just say, okay. I mean, a language like French is extremely rich and varied, and so certain words will be, absolutely, things to kind of avoid or look for alternatives when you're in normal conversation with people. I'd like to ask, other Arctic languages like Greenlandic, Icelandic. So Icelandic, yes, I have been back to a number of times. I've been back to Iceland a number of times. So yeah, I can still get by in Icelandic. Good or Greenlandic, haven't really studied at all. So I was trying to think, at the most in 1 year, I was doing 5 languages concurrently at the same time. So it's doable, especially if you're doing that full time as a student. It was completely doable. All of the languages improved. Is it something I particularly recommend? I recommend that you try it, and if it works, great. But as soon as you add a language to your portfolio, languages that you're studying, you obviously, or that you have to study. The great advantage of learning French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese is that they're all from the same language vocabulary in all of the languages. So that I found was a big help. And so things like that, you do help yourself with your learning, and in those languages particularly, I could speak them. So by the time I was at university, of course, I could speak French and Spanish pretty well, and already with the Italian and Portuguese, I'd already studied some, so I didn't start from complete zero. And with Swedish and Old Icelandic, but yeah, I mean, I still do a number of languages at one time. I've always done that, and typically it's normally like 1 or 2, maybe 3. Depends on my time, and it depends on what's happening in my life. Sometimes I have to just leave some to one side, but I also am not studying for a degree anymore. I mean, my university degree is already, it's finished. I've got it, and I don't have to sort of worry about passing exams in the same way as I did in the past. I don't have to do certain things like translation, interpreting, and that kind of stuff. That's all done. I don't have to write essays for people and dissertations in different languages anymore. Those are things that I've already done. So that's kind of behind me. So I do it more for pleasure now, and I don't feel any particular pressure to be at a level that somebody else wants for me. Yeah, sometimes I think that is one of the issues that people have. They feel pressure. And that was one of the things that was actually mentioned, was the pressure of exams and pressure of doing things for other people. Sometimes it makes people fail as well. And I agree that can be a real problem. So see, I don't have that anymore, fortunately. And so I can just enjoy learning the language for learning the okay. Rasmus, you don't like that method of translation either, okay, but you like sentence mining if you want to express something, especially if it's an idiom. Tend to look it up often on Google and go, okay, Google's your go-to. For the sake of checking out a natural way to express the same idea. Yeah, I mean, that can be really, really cool to do. With my Estonian, for example, with Speakly, that's very much sort of sentences that you would typically say in Estonian. So I found that to be quite helpful and useful to learn things in context. And yeah, I've been enjoying doing it. And you know, it's sort of, I don't know how many idioms I've had. I don't think I've really had any idioms yet. But I've definitely had a lot of things that you would say typically in, you know, about something in the language, which has been a really big help for me. But yeah, I agree. Learning things in sort of in situ in sentences is a very big help. For Cornish, there's a Cornish dictionary, and they have you can just look things up on the dictionary, but also you can go to what they call the corpus, and that has examples in sort of sentences. And there are translators on Google. I think, what's that one called? There's a really good website where they show you examples of a number of languages, and if you put in, you know, translate whatever to whatever. This isn't Google Translate. This is trying to think what the name of the site is now, but I can't remember. I'll put a link in. I'll find it. Put a link in the bio to show you which one I mean. And they tend to have lots of examples, so that's quite a handy thing as well, I found. A theme for Alive: learning languages as a way to reduce prejudice among people. Yeah, it's a very good topic, actually, Flavio. I like it. It can be quite challenging. The thing is, right, is we talk about learning languages to open your mind, and but also when you learn a language and you enter a community, you can also learn their own very unique prejudices as well. Not that you take them on, but you learn about them and things that you'd never even expected that they'd have as prejudices. It's quite interesting they'd have as prejudices. It's quite interesting to get into. But yeah, absolutely, really good idea. It's really necessary to try to study grammar well. Is it really necessary to try and study grammar well? Not just degree, but to communicate. So yes, to a degree. So I mean, grammar's part of the language, right? So I mean, I don't advocate learning lots and lots of tables necessarily. I think that can be boring and demotivating for a lot of people. Some people love it, and if you love it, do it. Just do it. But if you don't. Learning things, as Rasmus was saying, in situ, so learning expressions, phrases that you would typically want to say with the right grammar will help you to build a sort of a schematic in your head for how you can switch things out and say things in a different way to express different ideas and with different words and different grammatical features, and be confident doing it as well, because that's how you learn your first language. First languages. I mean, no one comes to a baby and says, "Okay, now you've got to learn the verb to be." Does that? The baby just learns to imitate whichever language it is, right, and builds on it slowly but surely, and starts using the communication for the world around them. And in that way, we are best suited to learn, because we learn things that we need to say, and that's a really, really good way of learning any other language after that as well. Where we differ from babies is that we can read and write, and we also know ideas and concepts like important, information, essential, politics, economics, government. We understand these ideas because we've been through an education system. We live in the world where these kinds of ideas are already used. So this is like a child. You're wasting your capacity as an adult and all of your learning because you're basically spending a lot of time looking at pictures and hearing words. I would definitely recommend using what you actually already know. So yes, learning grammar can be handy. Sometimes, for example, if you're learning a language that's similar to a language you already know, it might just be a case that you need it ethically. Sometimes it can, for example, if it's the subjunctive in French and the differences between French and Spanish, it can be really handy to see where they're the same and where they're not the same. It can also be handy to see, for example, if I were to say to you for German or Swedish that there are these strong verbs that are the same as in English, like swim, swam, swum, where the vowel changes, they tend to have a very close correlation to how that works in Dutch, in Afrikaans, in Swedish, in Norwegian, like Danish, in Icelandic, in German, all of the other Germanic languages. So knowing that type of grammar can help for sure and speed things up. Similar thing if you know cases for Polish, learning the cases and seeing how they end differently in Czech or in Russian or in another Slavic language can really help to speed up the learning there as well. So absolutely grammar has a role to play. Is it the be all and end all? No, but it can have a role to play. Now that you've, okay. One of the first idioms that I learned Estonian was beat around the bush. It translates word by word. What is an Estonian? Let's say, okay, like a cat going around the hot porridge. Wow, okay, that's cool, Rasmus. What would be your opinion on main benefits to be multilingual? You describe someone speaking different languages is that you understand, I think, sometimes different words and where they're from, and you see etymology as you can see sort of these sort of where languages meet and where things are the same and where things are different, and it helps you to understand as well different ways and points of view of how to put things together and to construct things. And because you're learning about different cultures when you learn a language, I mean, you can't just learn a language and not learn anything about the culture. If you do, it's a bit of a shame. It would be a very sterile learning process. But typically, you would learn about the culture as well. So you're getting cultural knowledge and awareness. You're also getting linguistic knowledge and awareness, and you get to put all that together in your head, which is great. Yeah. Okay, what was your level after finishing uni? I'm almost done with studying Danish, just thesis left, but I still feel like a fraud because my level is really bad, and a paper saying that I do know that I know Danish. Rasmus, it's really weird actually. I know what you mean. There are some people who finished university and they found it very difficult to communicate, for sure. So that is true, but sometimes this is a thing, right? Is I know some people talk about, if you can't read a book or if you can't do this or if you can't do that, you don't speak a language. And sometimes at university, it can be very focused on that very academic thing of you get very good at translating or very good at some of the skill of the language. Then you feel a bit, like this, feel a bit like a fraud. Yeah, absolutely. But does that necessarily mean you are one? Not necessarily. It depends what you want to do with the language. I'm sure that if you've got to a degree in Danish, you can then activate the spoken elements fairly easily. Just because when you language and you get you get to a point where you can where you've really done an in-depth study, it's more a case of and getting it out there in an active way. So stick with it, I'd say. Try and use it with Danish speakers and do as much as you can to actively use it so that you can get out of that feeling of being a fraud and really using the language to overcome that. I've got a feeling that there are some problems here on Instagram, and also we've got about 10 minutes, so I should really disappear. I should really make it a dash and finish off. I think Instagram's coming back. It looks like it's totally blocked on my side. I don't know if you can hear me on Instagram, but I will be happy to talk to you all again soon. Next week, I will most likely do a version of this, but at the Polyglot Conference. So please do get your ticket during the Polyglot Conference and come and speak to me there as well. I'd be very, very happy to see you at the Polyglot Conference. I'm very, very happy to to talk more, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Okay, all the very best, and happy languaging, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and have a great week. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.